My name is Elena Wright, and I am 32 years old. The call came at 2:47 a.m., the kind of hour where nothing good ever waits on the other end of the phone. My screen lit up with my mother's name, and before I even answered, a familiar knot tightened in my stomach. I was living in Berlin by then, 6 years into a life I had built piece by piece after finally escaping the gravity of my family's constant emergencies. I should have ignored the call. I knew that. But I didn't. Her face appeared on the screen, blotchy and tear-streaked, hair pulled back in the loose, careless way she always used when she wanted to look fragile instead of responsible. She was crying hard, gasping between words, telling me how empty the house felt, how the holidays weren't the same, how the kids kept asking when Aunt Alina was coming home. "We never see you anymore," she sobbed. "You don't care about family like you used to." I lay there staring at the ceiling, the glow of my phone cutting into the dark, listening to the same guilt wrapped in a new bow. She talked about Christmas traditions, about togetherness, about how much everyone missed me. She didn't mention money. She didn't have to. I could already hear it in the pauses, in the way she lingered on how hard things had been lately. I told myself it might be different this time. That was my first mistake. By noon the next day, I had booked the flight. An absurdly expensive, last-minute ticket that required 2 layovers and a brutal overnight stretch wedged between strangers. I justified it the way I always did. It's just once. It's only for a week. They're still my family. I packed gifts for my brother's kids, wrapped carefully in paper I couldn't really afford, and stuffed them into a suitcase already straining at the zipper. 21 hours later, I landed in Arizona with a dead phone, a stiff back, and a headache that pulsed behind my eyes. The airport smelled like pretzels and jet fuel. I looked exactly how I felt, rumpled, exhausted, and stupidly hopeful. I grabbed a ride share and watched the familiar streets roll past the window, each one tugging loose memories I thought I'd packed away for good. When the car pulled up in front of my parents' house, my chest tightened. Same trimmed hedges, same wreath on the door, same place where I had learned, slowly and painfully, that love often came with conditions. I dragged my suitcase up the walkway and rang the bell. For a split second, I imagined she might open the door and hug me. Really hug me. The way she used to when I was a kid and scraped my knees, before everything became transactional. The door flew open. She didn't look at my face. Her eyes dropped straight to my suitcase. "Oh good," she said briskly. "You're finally here. No hello, no welcome home, no hug." Before I could respond, she added, as if reading from a checklist, "You'll be watching the kids while we're gone. We leave early tomorrow." I blinked. Sure, I'd misheard. "Gone," I repeated. That's when my brother Mark appeared behind her, sunglasses still on like he was halfway out the door already. A duffel bag hung from his shoulder, and his 2 kids clung to his arms, loud and restless. He took one look at me and grinned. "Careful, guys," he said to them. "Don't wipe your hands on Aunt Alina. She's jet-lagged and cranky." They laughed. All of them laughed, my parents, my brother, the kids, like I was the punchline to a joke they'd been telling for years. I stood there, hair frizzed from travel, credit card maxed from flights and gifts, while they treated my arrival like a service finally showing up late. Something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not sad, just off. I stepped inside, rolling my suitcase over the threshold, feeling like I was crossing into enemy territory instead of my childhood home. The walls were covered in framed photos. Family vacations, birthdays, holidays I'd helped pay for but rarely appeared in. On the kitchen counter, I caught a glimpse of glossy brochures spread out neatly, pictures of white beaches and infinity pools glowing under the lights. A family trip, without me. My mother followed my gaze and smiled, the tight, satisfied smile she always wore when she thought she'd handled something cleverly. "This is why we needed you here, honey," she said. "The kids will be happier staying with you. You're so good with them." I nodded. I even smiled back. They didn't know it yet, but that smile wasn't compliance. It was a warning. Because standing there, jet-lagged and ignored, something in me finally snapped into place. I realized I hadn't flown halfway across the world to save Christmas. I had come home to end something. And once that realization settled in my chest, There was no going back. It took everything in me not to laugh when my mother said, "We really needed you here." Not because it was funny, but because it was finally honest. I followed them into the kitchen, my suitcase abandoned by the door like an afterthought. The kids were already fighting over snacks. Mark leaned against the counter scrolling through his phone, half listening as my mother launched into a monologue about how exhausting things had been lately. She used the same tone she always did when she was setting the stage for a favor. Tired, overwhelmed, just responsible enough to sound like a martyr. I watched her talk and thought about how carefully she had timed that 2:47 a.m. call. 2 weeks before it, she'd texted me screenshots of holiday prices, flights, resorts. "Isn't it insane how expensive everything is now?" She'd written, followed by a crying emoji. No direct request. She never asked outright. She didn't have to. She had trained me well. Just this once. That was how it always started. Just this once when my dad needed surgery and insurance didn't cover everything. Just this once when Mark's business idea needed a little push to get off the ground. Just this once when the water heater broke, or the electric bill was late, or the mortgage needed little help. I'd sent the money every time. Not because I was rich. I wasn't. I lived in a small apartment overseas, cooked most of my meals at home, and counted my expenses like they mattered. Because they did. But somehow, no matter how carefully I lived, there was always enough left over for their emergencies. Or at least, that's what they believed. What they didn't see were the compromises. The trips I didn't take. The furniture I didn't replace. The constant low-level anxiety every time my phone buzzed with a message from home. They never saw the nights I stared at my bank account, calculating what I could afford to give without sinking myself. They just saw that I always did. I leaned against the counter now, listening to my mother talk about how stressed she'd been, how she and my dad never get a break, how Mark was doing his best, but kids were expensive. None of this was new. What was new was the way I heard it. Because before I booked this flight, I'd finally stopped brushing things off. I had gone back through my records. Every transfer. Every payment. Every "thank you, sweetheart. We'll pay you back when things calm down." I saved screenshots of texts that lined up perfectly with deposits. Requests for grocery money followed by photos of brunch. Gas money for visiting relatives followed by new clothes and smiling selfies. And then there was the email. The one that had stopped my breath cold. It came from a bank I didn't remember dealing with anymore. My name was in the subject line. When I opened it, there it was in black and white: borrower, their mortgage, my name. I remembered the conversation from years ago vaguely. My parents sitting at the table, my mom waving papers like they were nothing. "It's just a formality," she'd said. "It won't affect you. We just need a better rate." I'd believed her. What she hadn't said was that every missed payment would hit my credit. Every shortfall would quietly land on my shoulders. And every time I covered the difference, it would reinforce the idea that I was there to fix things, silently, endlessly. Standing in that kitchen, I realized something that made my stomach twist. The only time my family treated me like I truly belonged was when they needed something. I wasn't the daughter who lived abroad building a life. I wasn't the sister who had worked her way into a stable career. I was the backup plan. The safety net. The invisible wallet that made their choices possible. I almost said no to the trip. I had hovered over the cancel button more than once. But then a different thought crept in. One that felt sharp and steady instead of guilty. If they were willing to drag me across the world to use me again, then maybe it was time I let them see what happened when I stopped playing my role. That's why I hadn't just booked a flight. I had booked a meeting with a financial advisor, downloaded 3 years of statements, organized everything into folders labeled with dates and names, and drafted a document I never thought I'd need. They thought I'd come home to help. I had come home to end the illusion. My mother finally paused, watching me closely like she sensed something was off. "You're awfully quiet," she said. "Everything okay, honey?" I met her eyes and smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I just think we should talk through a few things before you leave." She relaxed immediately. "Of course," she said. We'll go over the babysitting schedule after dinner. I didn't correct her. I glanced again at the brochures spread across the counter. Palm trees, blue water, bold promises printed in glossy ink. They had planned every detail of their escape, confident I'd be here holding everything together while they relaxed. They had no idea that by this time tomorrow, nothing would look the same. And for the first time, that thought didn't scare me at all. Dinner that night felt like a performance where everyone knew their lines except me. My mother moved around the kitchen with forced cheer, clattering dishes louder than necessary. My dad sat at the head of the table, flipping through the news on his tablet, barely acknowledging my presence. Mark scrolled on his phone, nodding occasionally when someone spoke, while the kids chased each other in circles between the chairs. They were relaxed, comfortable, certain. I watched them the way you watch people who don't realize the ground beneath them is about to give way. After we ate, my mother gathered the plates and gestured toward the living room. "Why don't you get settled, Elena?" she said. "We'll go over the details for tomorrow after." I shook my head. "Actually, can we all sit down for a minute? There are a few things we need to talk about before anyone goes anywhere." That got their attention. My dad looked up, frowning slightly, like I'd broken an unspoken rule. Mark sighed dramatically and dropped his phone onto the table. "Seriously, can this wait? It's been a long day." "It can't," I said calmly. Something in my tone must have registered, because my mother hesitated, then pulled out a chair. The kids were shooed into the living room with a tablet, the door left ajar. We gathered around the dining table, the same table where I'd done homework, celebrated birthdays, and once believed we were equals. I opened my laptop and set it in the center. "What's this about?" my dad asked. "Money," I said. Mark groaned.
"Alana, come on right now."
"Yes," I replied. "Right now." I clicked the trackpad and turned the screen so they could see. A spreadsheet filled the display, clean, color-coded, painfully organized. Rows of dates, columns of amounts. Notes attached to each line like receipts from the past. "I started tracking everything 3 years ago," I said. "Not because I wanted to fight. Because I needed to understand where my money was going." My mom's smile faltered. "Honey, we've been under a lot of stress. Do we really need to do this tonight?" I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse. I just scrolled. "March," I continued. The mortgage was 2 months behind. I sent $1,200. June, Mark's business expenses maxed out his cards. I sent $2,500. September, the water heater. $900. New tires for Dad's truck. $600. Electric bill shortfalls. $300 here, $400 there. I paused, letting the numbers sit there, impossible to ignore. "This doesn't include streaming services," I added, "the phone plan, grocery deliveries, or the emergencies that somehow lined up with holiday sales." Mark shifted in his seat, color draining from his face as he recognized his own messages in the notes column. "I swear I'll pay you back next month. Just until things stabilize." My mother's hand flew to her mouth when she saw screenshots of her texts next to deposits, requests for gas money followed by photos of her at a new salon. My dad's jaw tightened when a PayPal transfer labeled surgery help appeared, followed by a receipt for a brand new television dated the same week. "This isn't fair," my mom whispered. "You're making us look terrible." I shook my head slowly. "I'm not making you look like anything. I'm showing you exactly what happened." I scrolled to the bottom. A bold number sat there, large and undeniable. "In the last 36 months," I said quietly, "I have sent this household just over $62,000. The room went silent. No one spoke. Even the kids' cartoon seemed suddenly too loud in the other room. "That's not possible," my mom murmured. "That can't be right." "It is," I said. "Every dollar is documented." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin stack of papers, sliding them across the table. They came to rest beside the glossy vacation brochures. "This is a simple acknowledgement," I explained. "Not a lawsuit. Not a threat, just a record stating that this money was not a gift and that you'll start paying it back. Slowly, whatever you can manage." My dad finally reacted. "We're family?" he snapped. "You don't put family in debt like this. What is this? Are you going to sue us? I met his eyes, steady. Family doesn't hide a mortgage in their daughter's name and call her when the payment is late. My mother flinched. And family doesn't spend her money on luxuries. I continued. Then tell everyone she abandoned them when she stops paying. Mark grabbed the papers, skimming them frantically. This is insane, he said, his voice cracking. None of us can pay this back. I know, I said. And I'm not expecting it all at once. But I'm done pretending this was normal. My mother shook her head over and over. You wouldn't do this? She whispered. You wouldn't humiliate your own family. I'm not planning to, I replied. As long as the truth doesn't get rewritten. Then I clicked to another tab. The resort confirmation filled the screen. Their names, their dates, and the last 4 digits of my card. My dad frowned. What does that have to do with? You might want to sit down, I said. The status line blinked clearly beneath the reservation number. Cancelled. 3 days ago. I continued evenly. I called the airline and the resort. Since everything was booked through my account, I had every right to cancel it. The refunds are processing. My mother stared at the screen like it might change if she willed it hard enough. No, she whispered. No, no, no. I closed the laptop partway, just enough to see all their faces. When I said at the door that I wasn't babysitting, I said, what I meant was there is no vacation anymore. Not without me. Not with my money. My dad shot up from his chair. You had no right. I had every right, I said calmly. Because it was never yours to begin with. And in that moment, as the reality finally settled over the table, I knew there was no turning back. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a reckoning. For a few seconds after I said it, no one moved. The word cancelled hung in the air like smoke, thick and impossible to ignore. My mother stared at the laptop as if it were a living thing that had just betrayed her. My father's face flushed red, the vein in his temple pulsing as he tried to process what he was seeing. Mark looked from the screen to me, then back again, his mouth opening and closing without sound. You're lying. My mom whispered finally. You wouldn't do that to us. I didn't respond right away. I simply tilted the laptop back toward them and refreshed the page. The status didn't change. Cancelled. Refund in progress. I called the airline and the resort 3 days ago, I said. Everything was booked under my account, my card, my name. Legally, it was mine to cancel. My dad slammed his palm on the table. Those were our tickets? They were paid for with my money, I replied. That makes them my tickets. The kids' laughter drifted in from the living room, bright and unaware. It made the tension in the dining room feel sharper somehow, like two realities colliding. You knew how much we needed this, my mom said, her voice breaking. We've been under so much pressure. We just wanted one break. I nodded slowly. So did I. Mark pushed his chair back, running a hand through his hair. Okay, he said, trying to sound reasonable. Let's just reset. You're tired. We can talk about this later. There is no later, I said. You were leaving tomorrow. My dad rounded on me. You planned this? You waited until the last second to humiliate us. I shook my head. I waited until I had all the information. There's a difference. My mother stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room. You don't understand what you've done, she said. The deposits, the planning, we told people. Everyone knows we're going. Then you'll have to explain why you aren't, I said quietly. She stopped pacing and looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Who are you? She asked. You used to be generous. You used to care. I still care, I replied. I just stopped confusing generosity with being used. My dad pulled the laptop toward him, jabbing at the screen like he could undo it by force. This is theft, he said. You can't just take something back like that. I didn't take anything, I said evenly. I reclaimed what was mine. The silence stretched again. The weight of it pressed down on all of us. Finally, my mother sank back into her chair, her shoulders slumping. So that's it, she said softly. You came all this way just to punish us. I met her gaze. I came all this way to stop pretending. Mark let out a shaky breath. What are we supposed to do now? I leaned back slightly, folding my hands in my lap. The same thing I've been doing for years, I said. Figure it out. My dad scoffed. Easy for you to say. You have your fancy life overseas. I almost laughed at that. Instead, I said, you have no idea how carefully I've been living to make all of this possible. My mother looked down at the vacation brochures still sitting on the table, their bright images suddenly mocking. She picked one up, crumpled it in her fist, then let it fall. You've ruined Christmas, she said. No, I corrected her. I ruined the lie. That's when my dad stood up, so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. You're not gonna hold money over our heads, he barked. We raised you better than that. I stood too, my legs steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. You raised me to take responsibility, I said. I'm finally doing that. He pointed toward the hallway. Then don't expect us to sit here and thank you for it. I don't, I said. I gathered my things slowly, deliberately, refusing to rush or apologize. The kids were still in the other room, blissfully unaware that their holiday had evaporated before it even began. As I closed my laptop and slipped it back into my bag, I felt something shift again. But this time, it wasn't a switch shutting off. It was a door opening. Because canceling the vacation wasn't the end of what I'd come home to do. It was only the beginning. The room hadn't recovered from the shock of the canceled vacation when I opened my laptop again. This isn't over, my dad said sharply, as if saying it might turn the tide back in his favor. You're right, I replied. It isn't. I clicked to the next folder and turned the screen toward them once more. The header at the top of the email was simple and devastating. Mortgage statement, co. Borrowers listed below. My father froze. My mother inhaled sharply, one hand flying to her chest. Elena, she whispered. Please, not this. I felt the familiar tightening in my throat, the old instinct to back down, to soften what I was about to say. I swallowed it. You told me it was just paperwork, I said quietly. You said my name wouldn't really matter. But it did, it still does. I scrolled, letting them see the details. Dates, missed payments, partial payments that I had quietly covered so the bank wouldn't call. Every shortfall had landed on me just as much as it had on them. You've been gambling with my credit, I continued. Every time you paid late, every time you assumed I'd step in. My dad finally found his voice. We were never trying to hurt you, he said. We were just struggling. Struggling doesn't mean lying, I said. And it doesn't mean putting your daughter on the hook for a house she doesn't live in. Before either of them could interrupt me again, I clicked a button. A small video window popped up in the corner of the screen. A woman appeared, seated in a tidy home office, glasses perched on her nose. Hi, Elena, she said calmly. Is now still a good time? My dad leaned forward, furious. Who is that? This, I said without looking at him, is my financial advisor. My mother shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. You went behind our backs. I went in front of professionals, I replied. There's a difference. The advisor introduced herself politely, then began explaining exactly what it meant to be a co-borrower. Her voice was calm, measured, impossible to argue with. She explained how my credit was tied to the house, how late payments and ongoing shortfalls damaged my financial future. She paused briefly, then continued. As a co-borrower, Elena has the right to request removal from the loan. This typically requires the remaining borrowers to qualify independently. If that's not possible, refinancing, or in some cases, selling the property, may be necessary. My mother shook her head frantically. We can't afford that, she said. We can't move. This is our home. The advisor's expression remained sympathetic but firm. That is a matter between you and the lender. Elena is not obligated to remain financially responsible for a property she does not benefit from. I thanked her and ended the call. The silence afterward was suffocating. You're going to make us homeless, my dad said finally, his voice low and dangerous. Over numbers on a screen. I met his gaze. No. I'm going to stop letting you gamble with my future. I reached into my bag again and pulled out a folded letter, placing it on the table. This is my formal notice. I'm ending all automatic payments related to this property. The bank will contact you directly from now on. My mother's voice broke. But that's where the grocery money comes from. The utilities. How are we supposed to manage? I took a slow breath. The same way every other adult does. With your own income. With your own consequences. I opened another tab showing a list of monthly auto drafts, mortgage supplements, electricity, internet, grocery deliveries, subscriptions, car payments. My name sat next to every single one. As of today, I said, hovering the cursor over the cancel buttons. These stop. Mark's voice cracked. You can't just pull everything at once. At least give us time. You've had years, I replied. For a moment, doubt crept in. I saw my mother's fear, my father's anger, my brother's panic. The old version of me stirred, ready to patch the cracks again. Then I remembered the laughter at the door, the way my arrival had been treated like a utility finally restored. And that part of me went quiet again. I clicked. One by one, the payments disappeared. Confirmation emails pinged my phone like a countdown. My dad slumped back in his chair. This is cruel. No, I said gently. This is honest. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking but my resolve steady. The house you're sitting in, I added, was built on my credit. From now on, it stands on yours. And with that, the last illusion finally collapsed. No one stopped me when I stood up. For a moment I wondered if that was the part that hurt the most. Not the yelling, not the accusations, but the quiet acceptance that this was happening. That they were already recalculating their lives without the cushion they'd always assumed would be there. I slid my laptop into my bag and zipped it slowly, deliberately, as if any sudden movement might crack what little composure I had left. My legs felt unsteady, adrenaline buzzing under my skin, but my mind was clear in a way it hadn't been in years. This isn't how family acts, my dad muttered, staring at the table. I paused, my hand resting on the back of the chair. Neither is what you've been doing to me. My mother stood near the counter, wringing her hands. Elena, please, she said softly. We can talk about this. You're emotional, you just flew in. I almost laughed, emotional. As if this were jet lag talking and not 3 years of spreadsheets, 6 years of distance, and a lifetime of quiet responsibility. I'm calm, I said. I've never been calmer. I picked up my suitcase and started toward the hallway. The kids' cartoon was still playing, bright voices and cheerful music drifting through the house like nothing had changed. The contrast made my chest ache. My dad's chair scraped loudly as he stood. If you walk out that door after this, he barked, don't bother coming back. I stopped. My mother rushed forward, reaching for my arm. Gary, stop. She just needs time. We can figure something out. But she didn't actually stand between us. She didn't say I was wronged. She just wanted the storm to pass. I gently pulled my arm free. You already decided my value here, I said quietly. It was measured in what I paid for. If I'm not welcome without my money, then I was never really welcome at all. My dad pointed toward the door. Get out. I nodded once. Okay. There was no dramatic music. No final speech. Just the sound of my suitcase wheels rolling across the floor as I crossed the threshold of the house I'd once thought of as home. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. The late afternoon sun was warm on my face, and for the first time since I'd landed, I could breathe without feeling like I was asking permission. I walked down the driveway and didn't look back. No one followed me. No one called my name. I pulled out my phone and ordered a rideshare, my hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to ebb. When the car arrived, the driver stepped out and took my suitcase without comment. Where to? He asked. I gave him an address my parents didn't know. The ride was quiet. I watched the familiar neighborhoods fade into streets that felt newer, sharper, less heavy with memory. With every mile, the knot in my chest loosened. When we pulled up in front of the building, the driver whistled softly. Nice place, he said. I nodded, paid, and wheeled my suitcase through the glass doors. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh paint and something citrusy. Clean, neutral, mine. I rode the elevator to the 8th floor, the hum of it steadying my breathing. When the doors opened, I walked down the hall and unlocked the door at the end. The condo was quiet, empty except for the echo of my footsteps. White walls. A single lamp plugged in near the window. I set my suitcase down in the middle of the living room and just stood there. No voices, no demands, no emergencies. I took out my phone and opened my banking app. One last sweep, streaming services, cloud storage. Random charges I'd stopped noticing years ago. Cancelled, cancelled, cancelled. Each confirmation email felt like a thread snapping loose from my ribs. I brewed myself a cup of cheap coffee in my barely stocked kitchen and sat on the floor, back against the wall, mug warm in my hands. The doubts came, of course. What if they really can't manage? What if I went too far? What if I'm exactly what they say I am? Then I remembered my mother opening the door and looking past my face to my suitcase. I remembered the laughter, and beneath the fear, something unfamiliar settled in my chest. Relief. I hadn't walked out in anger. I had walked out without apologizing. And for the first time, that felt like freedom. The first sign that things were unraveling didn't come from a phone call. It came from Facebook. A week after I moved into the condo, my phone buzzed with a message from my friend Lena, who had known me since college. There was a screenshot attached and a single line of text beneath it. "Have you seen this?" My stomach tightened before I even opened it. It was my father's profile. His name sat at the top of the screen above a long, dramatic post about loyalty, sacrifice, and how some children forget where they come from the moment they get a fancy job overseas. He never mentioned me by name, but he didn't have to. Anyone who knew our family knew exactly who he meant. We were left with nothing right before Christmas. He'd written, "Pray for us." The comments poured in beneath it. "I'm so sorry, Gary. That's heartbreaking. Kids these days don't understand family. You gave her everything and this is how she repays you. If she won't help, maybe start a GoFundMe." I felt sick. He had done exactly what I told him not to do, rewritten the story while leaving out the inconvenient math. In his version, I was the cold daughter who chose money over blood. In his version, the years of silent transfers didn't exist. For a moment, the old panic surged. I paced my living room, phone clutched in my hand, thumb hovering over the call button. I could drive back there. I could demand he take it down. I could send money again just to make the humiliation stop. The fixer in me was screaming. Instead, I sat down and opened my laptop. I pulled up the spreadsheet. I pulled up the bank emails. And then I emailed my financial advisor. I told her about the post, about the years of financial support, about the sudden shift now that I'd stepped away. I asked one question. Is there anything else I should be doing to protect myself? Her response was calm, thorough, and validating. She told me to document everything, to save copies of all communications, and to make sure the bank had a clear picture of who had been covering what for years. She added, carefully, that when households claim hardship while receiving significant outside support, reviews sometimes happen naturally once that support stops. I didn't need instructions. I just needed to know I wasn't imagining things. Over the next few weeks, my parents' house started receiving letters. I didn't see them myself, but my mother's frantic texts filled in the gaps. Did you talk to the bank? We got something about reassessing the loan. Why is the utility company asking for full payment now? Then came the one that made my chest tighten. There's a letter from the IRS. I'm freaking out. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I hadn't done anything illegal. I hadn't reported them out of spite. All I had done was stop smoothing things over. The systems that had been quietly propped up by my money were finally seeing the full picture. Jason, no Mark, texted next. He asked to meet. We sat in a coffee shop near my building, the kind with mismatched chairs and chipped mugs. He looked smaller without his usual sarcasm. Dark circles under his eyes, stubble creeping along his jaw, a delivery bag slung over his shoulder. Dad needs to shut up online, he said immediately, rubbing his face. Those posts are making everything worse. I took a slow sip of coffee. I warned him. He hesitated. The letters, you did something, right? What I did, I said carefully, was stop lying to myself. I talked to professionals. I made sure my name wouldn't go down with a ship I wasn't steering. He stared at the table, then sighed. I picked up more shifts, sold some stuff, Moved the kids into a smaller room so I could take on a roommate. He looked up at me. It sucks. But I didn't realize how much everything actually costs. Groceries. Gas. Daycare. I always figured if it got bad enough, we'd call you. That admission hit harder than any accusation. Meanwhile, my mother started selling things. Designer bags, home decor she'd once shown off online. The new television my dad bought after his surgery disappeared, replaced by an old one from the garage. Then, one gray morning, the truck was repossessed. A neighbor sent me a photo without comment. I stared at it for a long time. My dad kept posting online, vague and bitter, hoping someone would carry his outrage back to me. I never responded. I didn't defend myself publicly. I didn't need to. I had my receipts. I had my distance. And slowly, painfully, the story began to change. Not online, but in real life. Not with apologies, but with consequences. And for the first time, the truth was moving forward without me carrying it on my back. Christmas morning arrived without an alarm. No frantic knocking. No passive-aggressive sighs from the kitchen. No last-minute emergencies disguised as family traditions. I woke up naturally, sunlight spilling through the wide window of my condo, painting soft rectangles on the floor. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. And then I remembered. I was exactly where I had chosen to be. I lay there listening to the quiet hum of the city waking up below me. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed. A car door slammed. Life moved on, indifferent and steady, and for once it wasn't demanding anything from me. I made coffee slowly, savoring the small ritual. I didn't rush. I didn't check my phone right away. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, mug warm in my hands, watching steam curl upward like something being released. This was the Christmas they said I ruined. And it was the most peaceful one I'd ever had. My phone eventually buzzed, not with guilt, not with panic, but with a message from Lena. "Proud of you," it read. "You look lighter." I smiled. I hadn't spoken to my parents in weeks. After the letters, the repossession, the slow collapse of the image they'd built, the messages had stopped, not because they understood, but because there was nothing left to leverage. No emergency dramatic enough, no guilt sharp enough, no bill big enough to scare me back into place. They didn't apologize, but they adjusted, and that, I realized, was enough. I spent the morning exactly how I wanted. I cooked a simple breakfast. I put on music I liked, soft, instrumental, nothing tied to memories I was trying to outgrow. I wrapped a scarf around my neck and went for a walk through the neighborhood, watching families hurry past with packages and expectations. For the first time, I didn't envy them. By noon, snow began to fall, light, hesitant, almost unsure of itself. I watched it from my window, feeling a strange gratitude for all the things that hadn't happened this year. No argument at the dinner table. No whispered accusations. No silent tally of what I owed simply for existing. That afternoon, I opened my laptop one last time, not to cancel something, not to prove anything, but to plan. I updated my savings goals. I outlined travel plans for the spring. I enrolled in a professional course I'd been postponing for years, because someone else always needed something more urgently. Each decision felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. In the evening, I set the table for one and cooked a proper meal. Nothing fancy. Something warm and grounding. I lit a candle, not for atmosphere, but as a quiet marker. This is where the old story ends. I thought of my parents' house, still standing, still occupied, just no longer subsidized by my silence. I thought of Mark figuring things out the hard way, learning costs instead of outsourcing them. I thought of my mother, forced to sit with the discomfort she'd always redirected. And then I stopped thinking about them at all. Because revenge, I'd learned, isn't loud. It doesn't always come with confrontations or scorched earth or dramatic final words. Sometimes revenge is quiet. It's a canceled transfer, a boundary held, a life rebuilt without asking permission. Later that night, I stood by the window again, city lights blinking below like distant stars. I realized something then, something that made my chest ache in a way that wasn't painful. They would tell the story forever. About the daughter who abandoned them. About the betrayal. About the Christmas that changed everything. But I would never again need to correct it. Because the truth didn't need an audience. I had my peace, my independence, my future, And that was the ending they never expected. My name is Elena Wright. I am 32 years old. And this is the first year of my life that truly belongs to me.